Project ECHO Healthy Relationships. We're glad that you could join us today. Again, if you've not taken a minute, just put your contact information and name into the chat. That just helps us get to know everybody that's on the call. We are recording today's session. We keep those on our Canvas page as well as our YouTube channel. You are always able to go back and review those, use those to share with others that missed the call. And again, listen to it again, because I know if you're anything like me, it takes a little bit for me to digest information. So I always find it helpful to go back and look at those. We love ECHO as an interactive community, even though we are on Zoom. So please put your information and questions into chat, raise your hand, come off mute. It's a great way to just kind of get to know everybody on the call. We do talk about sensitive information, so avoid using any information that could be identified by anybody. So no mother's maiden last name, this is a social security number, any of that information. If you have any questions, you can ask one of our hub members. They all have an asterisk in front of their name, or will now have an asterisk in front of their name. It's just easier to find them in the chat when that's in front of them. Key components of an ECHO session is we really are hoping to build that professional development. Sometimes as we're direct service providers, knowing who else we can ask for that information. So I see Gracie on my screen. She might share some information today that I then want to be able to follow up with her. I don't know where she works or where she's from, but it then gives me that I'm able to reach out to her. So continuing that professional development. We will always have a presentation, so a didactic speaker, as well as then we are going to have a case presentation where all of you guys on the call share information and resources about a topic, and we get to discuss it. Because again, being out in the field, we don't always get to discuss those things with our colleagues and other people that do the same job. So it's a great opportunity for that. We've all been on Zoom for quite some time, so probably know how to raise our hand and rename our profile. But again, if you don't know how to do that, if you'll just take a minute to do that, and then pre-registering, you can reach out to Project ECHO at usu.edu, and we'll get you registered as well as send you out any information that we have. We send out certificates of attendance, so but we do ask that you fill out the survey. So the survey will be dropped in the chat throughout today's session, and after you complete the survey is when we email those credit for attendance, those certificates. Canvas is where we store everything, all the recommendations that have been talked about in past sessions, as well as any information from each of the sessions. So if you would like access to the Canvas page, please email projectecho@usu.edu and we will get you access to that. We have another opportunity to just have a discussion board. So again, it's a way to connect through our virtual worlds. Case studies are a great way to get information about cases that we work with from all of the amazing people on the call. So if you have a case that you would like some more information, please consider submitting a case study. We do have some social media accounts that you guys can take a minute and follow. We share information on those as well as anything about upcoming sessions. And then I'm going to stop sharing and turn the time over to Tim and Alyssa, who are going to be our presenters today.
Hey everybody, I hope you can hear me. I think you can. Right? Awesome. Thanks for having us. My name is Tim Curran. I'm an associate professor in communication studies. I study relationships and health. And with me today is my graduate student, Alyssa Ferrin. She's an expert in translating academic research for the public, specifically health information. She's getting her MA now and graduating soon. So honestly, thanks so much for having us. We are happy to give this talk and have you interrupt us with questions as we go. If you want to make it more dynamic, we are totally good with that. So please, we can't see anybody, but just come off Zoom if you want to and interrupt us with a question or a comment or a thought. That would be great. So let's get into our talk about healthy communication in romantic and sexual relationships. Can I move this? Sorry, bear with me. The first thing I think about as a scholar, when I'm thinking about healthy sex communication is what does that even mean? And the reason why that's so complicated is because ideas of being healthy and appropriate in romantic and sexual bonds are always going to be situated in cultural norms. So what that means is what we consider to be culturally normative or appropriate, sometimes we think is therefore healthy. And really the link between culture and health is much more complicated. This happens in a variety of health contexts, but it really happens when we think about talking about sex. There's this constant clash between what we know to be culturally normative and what we know to be healthy more in terms of academics. A classic example of this is if we think about just outside of the context of developmental disabilities, if we just think about, culturally, we have this idea of the birds and the bees talk, right? Where parents give one talk to their children one time about sex, and they should have the information, right? Because culturally, we see sex as this private thing where we don't talk about sex outside of our relationship to a sexual partner, and it's more of a taboo thing, even though that model might not be necessarily very healthy. Another classic example of where culture and health can clash is ideas about talking about condom use and condom negotiation. It's a very important social skill to have in navigating a healthy sex life. But if I feel like the person in my life doesn't need to know those skills because they shouldn't be using condoms, because they shouldn't be having sex at all, that's when we see culture and health working against one another. And none of us are above culture. So I think, what does this mean for counselors and service providers? We have to continually check the way we communicate. And I think this is a lifelong question. Again, no one's above culture. It's a constant check. Do we convey normative messages about sexual health or informative messages about sexual health? So just constantly checking the assumption that because something's normal in the culture, it doesn't necessarily make it a healthy choice and vice versa. But if we can broaden our perspective on sex and help a variety of people navigate their sex lives in a healthy way, I think we're doing the right thing. Related to this idea of culture and health is traditional safe sex communication models in sex education. Most people have been educated about sex in one way, shape, or form, and by far the most dominant way we educate the public about sex is using the sex as risk communication paradigm. It's a really simple paradigm. It basically says we're going to define sexuality and sex in terms of risk and risk taking. So sex is risky, don't have sex, right? And this perspective has a pretty near exclusive focus on the following things. It will pretty much predominantly talk about acts of sexual intercourse. So to educate someone about sex, broadly, I'm just going to talk about sexual intercourse and kind of ignore other sexual acts. It's going to conceptualize intercourse as this inherently dangerous act. And if I emphasize the risks of sex, that's how I keep people healthy. In essence, to be healthy, just avoid sex, right? We've probably all heard messages that fall under that umbrella. The problem, though, with this paradigm, there's multiple problems, but if all acts of sex are risky, right, then it's just ignoring sexual acts that are lower stakes and safer for people to explore from those that might be higher risk acts, both for physical and emotional outcomes, right? But if just all sex is bad, just don't do it, is starting to talk about sex as this either or thing rather than many different acts that operate on a continuum. Another thing is if you frame sex as you're either having sex or you're not having sex, right, rather than a continuum of behaviors, that is going to automatically ignore the communication skills people need to communicate sexual wishes and boundaries, and then to understand sexual wishes and boundaries in other people. Basically, if sex is as simple as sex is wrong or risky, just don't do it, I don't really need any communication skills to manage that phenomenon because it's so simple. Just say no, right? So if we present sex as simple, what happens is the skills we present back to people also tend to be extremely simple. Just say no. And in reality, sex is way more complicated than that, but we just kind of ignore that. So in general, these paradigms of saying sex is risky, just avoid it, they're going to inhibit people's ability to explore sexuality in gradual ways that are intentional and that are satisfactory. And as health scholars, that's really what we're most interested in. We're interested in helping people move through sex gradually and make intentional choice about what they're doing with informed consent that tends to result in satisfactory sex lives. But this paradigm, the sex as risk paradigm, in essence, isn't doing any of that. It's just taking a very complex social context, sex. I mean, everyone has really intimate thoughts and feelings about sex, and it takes all of those contexts and simplifies it into it's just a risky behavior. So sex communication is really difficult for everybody. But when we think about people with developmental disabilities, they're facing unique barriers to proper sex education. We know from the research that people with developmental disabilities tend to be less informed about sexuality. They tend to have fewer sexual experiences. And as I'm sure you all know, they're more likely to be victims of abuse, coercion, and exploitation. Couple that with their sex education is especially limited and lacking. So they're getting less education than other populations, and they're facing these unique barriers. But the research shows that compared to typically developing people, people with developmental disabilities want to express their sexuality and they want to form intimate relationships. So the desire is there and the need is there. It's just how do we meet that need? Furthermore, if you look at the research on sex education for people with developmental disabilities, you'll see some problematic findings. Most often, sex education programs for these people are not grounded in any research, and the subject matter tends to remain really superficial. So for example, you might see some programs that simply talk about various STIs and what they mean. And yes, of course, that can contribute to a healthy sex life to understand those things, but does it really help us foster those complicated social skills to build positive and healthy relationships to other people and to understand the complexities of consent? Of course not. All right, it's not even close to meeting that bar. And if you just ask people, this is in the research too, if you just ask people with intellectual disabilities, what do they want and what do they need out of sex education, they report the following things. They want to feel support and have support from others in fostering meaningful relationships to other people. They want help understanding their sexuality and they want to feel like they have control in their sex lives. And they want to feel support and encouragement from their social network. So they're reporting to us what their needs are in the education. We just have to find models that make that work. So how do we address these issues? We should look at a sex education program that is based in research for people with developmental disabilities. It does need to help people foster meaningful relationships to others. It needs to help people understand their sexual boundaries and desires, but also other people's sexual boundaries and desires. So consent is always happening. And it needs to foster support from trusted others, like thinking about, and Alyssa's going to talk about this a bit, thinking about talking about sex and fostering healthy sex lives. It takes more of a village rather than just individuals working in these little private bubbles. Those are the kinds of models that tend to work better, and they could address the needs for people with developmental disabilities. This is where I'm going to turn it over to Alyssa. it was my job to explain the problem, and she's going to go over what we think is a really good solution. It's called the ABCD model of healthy sex communication. It's a model based in research that addresses the issues I just raised. So she's going to go over that, and then I'll give it to you.
Awesome. All right. So like Tim said, I'm going to be talking about the ABCD model. This was developed by Shallot in 2011. It was founded in research to help people develop the fundamental communication skills, relationships, and resources that people need to become healthy sexual and emotional beings. So this model really emphasizes understanding pleasure and intimacy through discovery, as well as having healthy emotions, connections, and relationships. The ABCD model isn't really as interested in discussing things like sex is a risky act or the potential dangers of sex. It's a model that more assumes that most people are sexual beings and operates under that assumption. It also assumes that people need to have communication, build relationships, and especially have the resources they need to be able to have healthy sex lives and healthy sex communication. This deviates from cultural norms that sex is something that's privatized, we don't talk about sex, or it's that kind of one and done conversation. But using this model will really break from that norm to give people a village, like Tim was saying, to support them in these conversations. So the first part of the ABCD model is the A, which stands for autonomy of the sexual self. Too far. So autonomy of the sexual self is the idea that people have a sexual self and we need to help them have that awareness. So recognizing that people are sexual opens the door for people to talk about their sexual side, self-reflect on those desires and thoughts, and increase awareness about their own sexual self. Knowing their own sexual desires and what they enjoy, what they don't want, what they're comfortable with, all of those things can help them to be able to communicate their boundaries clearly. Understanding our own sexual selves is one of the first ways we can teach consent about the things we want, because it helps us to also understand that others have a sexual self as well. This consent should always be communicated clearly in any sexual act. And sex is very individualistic, so we use communication to see if we are a good match with another person, see if that's something that we want to pursue. So to understand and set these boundaries, people need to understand their sexual desires, like I said. It's important that we know how to differentiate their own sexual desires compared to others' expectations or others' sexual desires. It's also important to remember that people are allowed to change their minds about what they want. They're allowed to discover that they do or don't like something, or discover that they want something different. It's also important to help individuals understand how to decide to act on sexual desires safely and appropriately. One way we can do this is through informed decision-making, which comes from understanding all of the available information and then making a choice based on your understanding of that information. This can help people to take responsibility for their thoughts, actions, feelings, including their sexual desires. Sexual autonomy happens when people learn what they want and enjoy by slowly exploring, slowly progressing, but only when all parties are comfortable and when all parties want to do so. We're constantly assessing our sexual desires and our comfort levels before moving on to something else. And we're constantly getting consent, talking about doing sex acts for the first time, and we can't expect people to know if they like it or if it's something that they want to continue doing if they are never given an opportunity to try it. So it's important for us to cultivate a culture that really accepts people are allowed to try things if they want, and then reflect on those sex acts, which can help remove judgment and create ground for more communication. Providers and caregivers can help start these conversations and be big help in helping individuals to reflect on their sexual autonomy by asking things like, what do you think being ready for sex or sexual activities means? When is a couple ready for those kinds of activities? So those are just a couple ways to get that conversation started. So the B in the ABCD model stands for building positive romantic relationships. It's important for us to validate people's need for intimacy because these desires for intimacy are normal and healthy. We also know that healthy, positive romantic relationships can help build positive sexual outcomes. Oftentimes, we teach relationships by explaining what an unhealthy relationship is, but it's really important to also teach people the characteristics of a positive, equal romantic relationship that is appropriate to a person's life stage, as well as what it might look like to build those kinds of relationships. So some things that you could do to build a positive romantic relationship might be getting to know someone. And a big way we do this is through self-disclosing, which is when we purposefully and intentionally share personal information with other people that they might not already know or might not have been able to find out themselves. Doing this can help us to build and reflect trust in other people, but we want to do this slowly and start small. Think about what kinds of things might you share on a first date, kind of those more surface level things, and then build into maybe some more meaningful, deeper topics. It's also important to remember that you don't want to share things that you might want to keep private. And it's also important to listen when others share with us, when others self-disclose with us. You want to respond to show that you paid attention, that you're interested and care about what they said to you, what they shared with you, because self-disclosing kind of assumes that you want to know about the other person as well. And this needs to be a back and forth, especially if we're hoping to build a positive romantic relationship. Another thing we can do is to build trust. We can build trust when we believe that someone is reliable and will do what they say, and when we believe that they will put effort into looking out for us and looking out for our relationship. Building trust does take time, though. It doesn't happen immediately. It's not automatic, and it should be earned. In order to build trust, people need to respect each other's boundaries, not just in sex, but in any aspect of a relationship. So thinking about whether you feel safe with this person, do you feel like they listen to you? Do you feel like you're able to listen to them? As well as watching for their nonverbal or verbal communication when they express their boundaries, and making sure that you don't push their boundaries as well can help us to build trust. Another important aspect of building a positive romantic relationship is to deal with conflict. Conflict often gets a really bad rap. It's seen as a really negative thing, but conflict is actually pretty unavoidable in any relationship, and it's a part of a positive relationship, especially when it's done in a healthy way. And when it's done well, it can help us to grow closer together, strengthen our relationships, and learn more about ourselves. So if we are trying to work together to solve problems in our conflict, and find solutions that meet both parties' needs when possible, or if a solution can't be found, as sometimes that happens, trying to come at it with an understanding that you have the same goal and you're trying to work together, not against each other, and not yelling or being aggressive or just really having negative conflict. Some ways that we can have healthy conflict are to use active listening, which is when we really focus our minds on what the other person is saying. We try to understand their ideas and their feelings, and we do our best to remember what they said as well. Another thing we can do is to use I statements to express our own feelings instead of putting our feelings on another person. So, for example, saying something like, I feel frustrated when you interrupt me, rather than saying, you don't listen to me, can help us to communicate better and to have healthier conflict. It's also really important for us to strive for power equality in our relationships, and thinking about, even if it doesn't happen every time, could your partner influence you, or could you influence your partner? And if the answer is no, then that's a big red flag. If you can't ever change your partner's mind, because it can indicate that they don't value you or your intellect, and can also indicate an unhealthy power dynamic in the couple.
Alyssa, Adam has his hand raised. So Adam, do you have a question, comment? Adam, do you want to come off mute? And
I was going to think about putting that in the chat if that's okay.
yep. Hey,
Yeah, feel free to just interrupt me if there's questions in the chat. Another important part of striving for power equality is to turn towards each other in times of need. We can do this through showing interest in each other, making efforts to have connections with each other, and recognizing any bids for connection from our partners or from romantic interest. These bids for connection might look like a question or a comment or request even for that connection. It's important for us to listen to their bid for connection, whether they express that verbally or non-verbally, and respond appropriately to show that we care. And lastly, it's important to just have fun in our relationships. You want to be able to do things you enjoy with someone you enjoy being around, and hopefully you're doing that with someone you actually like and are interested in. All of this together can result in sexual activities that are more likely to be safe, wanted, and gratifying. And again, caregivers and providers can be a big help in this by having conversations with individuals, asking questions like, are there couples you admire in your life? Why? What makes that relationship special? If romantic relationships aren't fitting or seem difficult to think of, caregivers could also ask questions about a friendship instead and start there. Okay. So the C in the ABCD model stands for connection. And this connection can be with a caregiver or a provider, but it should be someone who the individual has a close relationship with and is able to have frequent communication with. And that frequent communication might look like regular check-ins or conversations about their sex lives. This is really important because sex is a moving target, and our sexual desires and boundaries can change, so it needs to be kind of an ongoing conversation. Said a few times, not just a one and done. And having this connection can help lead to positive sexual relationships, especially when the individual sees that their caregiver or provider is someone who is open, skilled, and comfortable. If they see that their caregiver or provider views sex as something that's icky or something that we avoid talking about, then these individuals can learn to see sex that way as well, which makes it just that much harder for individuals to have open conversations and ask questions, get help with things that they need help with. But it can be really vulnerable to talk about sex, and that emotional burden needs to fall on the caregiver to provide a comfortable environment for these individuals. Caregivers play an important role in helping individuals have sexual autonomy and build positive, healthy romantic relationships. So again, it's really important for us to build and maintain these connections. We can do this part by saying things like, I want you to feel like you can talk to me, or I'm here to support you, or just asking questions. And the last part of the ABCD model is the D, which stands for accepting diversities. So sexuality is an area where each person is unique. Everyone is going to move at different paces, both emotionally and sexually. And it's okay to want or enjoy things slower or faster than other people. And just because someone is at a certain age doesn't mean they have to hit certain developmental stages. Research actually shows it's more individualistic than that. People are also going to vary in their sexual orientations, and it's okay for people to want or enjoy different things than other people might, but we need to support people in how unique they are. It's also important to keep in mind that sexual relationships aren't always romantic, and vice versa. Romantic relationships aren't always sexual. Really, the important thing for us as health scholars is that any of these relationships are healthy. Caregivers can help teach individuals to respect their own uniqueness as well as the uniqueness of others by accepting and respecting differences, because we're going to encounter people who are different from us, and it's okay to not like what they like or to disagree, but we need to be open-minded and kind when people are different from us. So kind of to recap what I just talked about in this model, when we are talking about these relationships with a romantic or sexual partner, we want to make sure that individuals are understanding and communicating their boundaries, that they're doing things they're comfortable with and want to do, that they're having healthy communication that can build trust, intimacy, and help them to balance power dynamics, as well as promoting having fun in these relationships. And then in a relationship with a trusted caregiver, we want them to have close, supportive connections with frequent and comfortable communication that helps individuals to accept and respect human differences. So the ABCD model, implementing this model involves making a commitment to giving all individuals the ability to discover pleasure and intimacy in the context of their romantic or sexual relationships. Again, it doesn't ignore the potential dangers of sex, but it can help give individuals the tools needed to make intentional and respectful choices about when and how to engage in sex. By emphasizing the positive potential outcomes of healthy sexuality and relationships, we can encourage people to form their own positive expectations and hopes about sex and relationships, because healthy sexual communication isn't just going to be a one and done. It's not just the birds and the bees, not just one having the talk. It takes time and it's going to be a process, but doing so can help individuals discover pleasure and intimacy in their relationships and to have fulfilling sexual relationships.
Thanks, everybody. We have some more general stuff if you want us to go over it, but that's the model and what we planned for today. We think that the ABCD model is really useful for people with developmental disabilities because it relates to the needs that they have reported in their desires and research. I think helping people move through this model slowly and intentionally is a really important consideration for people with developmental disabilities. How do we talk about self-disclosure and power? How do we talk about the autonomy of the sexual self? But the essence of what it provides is increased consent, increased intentional decision-making, and hopefully increased satisfaction. So if you all have questions, we're happy to take them. And thanks for having us again.
I could find my unmute button. If anybody has any questions or thoughts, feel free to come off mute and ask those questions. I'll just read one comment that Adam did put in there in the chat while people are trying to find their off mute button. It says, he personally has favorite interests and hobbies that he likes people to know about. He likes them to know that he likes football, movies, Lego, and are things that interest to him. But then when someone tells him to do something on a busy schedule that causes conflict, he gets negative. But I say, let them be, and I'll let myself enjoy what I like. So again, just that nice way to communicate your wants and dislikes.
And I think
I want to comment on this part as well, Janelle.
Hey.
I'll just give like an example of this. So say someone wants to do something like on a Sunday during a really busy football day, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I have a really busy football day, can't do it. And they're like, oh, you should go, Adam, it's gonna be fun. And I'm like, well, football's really more fun for me to do than just that, because it's really my life.
Mm-hmm.
And though my season is coming to an end, where I'm getting to a point where I'm gonna have more time to do. But anywho, the whole moral of this whole idea of having this whole model, like what you said in the PowerPoint,
Mm-hmm.
and for my comment, is that let the person enjoy what they enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have something that you enjoy, let it be yourself.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Adam. I think what you're saying relates so well to the model, because so much of a healthy romantic relationship is really about just finding the right match. There's no such thing as like a bad person, right? It's more about, or if we break up with someone, maybe it's just because they don't value the same things we do. So finding a romantic partner that respects my boundaries over my hobbies is really important, because maybe we're just a good match, right? And if someone isn't as interested in the things I'm interested in, that doesn't make them a bad person, but maybe we're just not good romantic partners, and that's okay, right? There's so much space for, I think people worry that breakups are bad, or if someone doesn't like my hobbies, that's a bad thing, when in fact, we're all just so unique. It's more about finding people that just fit within our own boundaries, and that's what a healthy relationship looks like. And I think what you're saying makes total sense in relationship to that.
Well, I could give an example of this, because I am going to give a PowerPoint in March for Echoes. I am going to talk about what I'm looking for in a relationship.
Nice.
And so I am going to give an example of what I'm looking for in a relationship. So if you do end up coming to this presentation, you're going to be really informed by me.
That sounds great. That sounds wonderful. It's nice to know what we do want in romantic relationships and what we don't want. That's kind of like the A part of this model, is figuring out who am I in relationship with other people, and what will make my life satisfying, and how can I make other people's lives satisfying, right? So that sounds wonderful.
Well, thanks so much for my time for this comment.
That was great. Thank you. Can't exit this.
Other questions or comments that people have?
Are you trying to stop sharing?
Okay. Well, Tim and Alyssa, thank you so much for your time and information on how to have more healthy communications within our relationships. I am going to ask Alex to come off mute, and she is presenting our case today.
Thanks, Janelle. We're happy to do it.
Thank you. Alex, I don't see you on my screen.
Okay, I just had to find my screen. I have so many open. So I'm going to go ahead and share it so everyone can see it while I read it out. If I can find my document. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger for everybody. Okay, so this is our case for today. So just imagine yourself in this scenario, and then we're going to chat about it in the breakout groups. So you are helping to facilitate a training teaching adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities about healthy relationships, consent, and boundaries. This session is focused on all the different ways there are to say no. During the session, one of the participants, Matilda, passes you a note that says, "I'm afraid to tell my boyfriend no because he gets angry with me." After you receive this disclosure, you say, "Let's talk afterwards." You don't have a close relationship with Matilda outside of the class. She's a very engaging person. She's very bubbly. She always wears a matching hair tie with her socks and is a very fun person to be around and participates in the class a lot. She has a job where she works as a housekeeper at a hotel, and she lives in an apartment complex where she gets drop-in assistance. There are several people who use services who live at the same apartment complex. And so we have several discussion questions for the breakout groups. Janelle, do you want me to paste all of this into the chat, or do you want me to read the discussion questions?
However we can put it into chat.
Okay. Copy this and put it in the chat. Well, it says it's too long.
Wonder if you just paste the discussion questions.
Yeah, do that.
So we are going to go into 2 breakout groups. Alex and Aaron will both be facilitating a breakout group. We're going to be talking about those questions. So again, take a minute to introduce yourselves, where you're from, and then Aaron and Alex, you both are going to be facilitating those breakout groups. Any questions before we move to the breakout group? Okay, then I am just going to open all breakout groups. Okay, everybody should see that.
I mean, I can talk if that's what you like.
Sure, you said you guys had a great discussion. Share it with us.
Okay, so Erin provided some really good good information and also really good questions, and she she did mention like in the presentation that she's going to do in April, which I'm really looking forward to. I hope her presentation becomes powerful. So the questions that were presented in the presentation were actually the ones that I've experienced personally in the past. And I'm going to explain all that in my presentation in March.
Great.
I can jump in too and share some of the stuff from our group as well, if that's okay, Adam. Can I join you?
Yeah,
Great.
I'm about to lose my voice, so go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. So like you said, yeah, our group talked quite a bit, just kind of in summary of all of what we talked about. We had some good contributions about follow-up questions. So asking if she feels safe in other aspects of her relationship, right? It kind of mentioned that there might be some emotional or verbal abuse happening. So we want to make sure that she knows that this is unhealthy. All of our group members recommended to tell her that this was an unhealthy situation. We did talk about mandatory reporting and how if in our conversation something led to us thinking she was experiencing abuse, we would report that and be transparent about that. We also really liked how the presentation kind of talked about healthy relationships and comparing what she's experienced to the healthy relationship that they modeled can kind of point out the differences and how hers is unhealthy. We liked the ABC model. I think we said the B part of the ABC model, kind of asking those questions about, do you feel safe? Do you feel respected? Kind of walking her through that. And then resources, we would share local therapists, Utah Parent Center, DCFS, local domestic violence, sexual assault shelters. And a step further in that could be making the call, right? If they want to call, sitting there with them, encouraging them. Places like Peace House, where I work, we do take walk-ins. So if she doesn't feel safe to go home, taking her to a place like Peace House, somewhere where they could get almost immediate resources.
Those are some great, it does sound like you guys had some great discussions.
You forgot to mention Columbus Next Works, Erin.
And Columbus Next Works. Thank you, Adam.
Nice. Alex, I don't know if you want to share anything from your guys' group.
Yeah, so we had a lot of the similar discussion topics as Erin's group, but in addition to that, like especially with the follow-up questions, we wanted to know if Matilda had anyone that she could talk to, where she lived, if she felt unsafe, if anyone else knew about that situation. And so a lot of our discussion revolved around the context and really understanding what Matilda's understanding of sexual relationships was and her relationship with this boyfriend, and whether she had anyone that she could reach out to, whether it was anyone who managed that assisted living facility, a family member, or those sort of things. And then in terms of resources, giving her flyers and helping her make sure she understood consent. And then all of it was very similar to what Erin's group discussed. And let me look at this again. My dog really wants to go out, so I apologize to everyone. We also talked about the ABCD model and how helpful that would be for breaking it down and having a discussion with Matilda. And then
Alex, your audio's cutting out.
I apologize. That would be my dogs hollering.
Well, those that all sound like wonderful. And again, we do put all of the recommendations combined onto the Canvas page so everybody can check those out and utilize them. And I just dropped that in there, Alex and Erin. So whoever took notes, if you'll just email those over to projectecho@aggies.usu.edu. Next month, you guys both of your groups mentioned mandatory reporting. We are going to have adult services come and talk to us next month around mandatory reporting and what that looks like and what that entails. So please join us next month. It is going to be February 24th, 2025. I don't know if anybody else is ready for January to be over. It feels like it's been a year already. So Adam says no.
Well, hey, look, it's my birthday month.
Oh, so you want it to last forever. Understandable. Okay, well, thank you all for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.